The story begins with the protagonist Liu Ye, a player who never took games seriously. Because of this, he could only watch helplessly as his sister was murdered by an unknown person wielding a sword. The weight of guilt fell upon Liu Ye. As the older brother, he failed to protect her. Lost in thoughts, trying to understand where he went wrong and what led to this tragic outcome, he didn't notice the silhouette of a man with a sword approaching from behind. In an instant, the blade pierced his body, causing him to bleed. While still conscious, a stranger picked him up and without hesitation, threw him next to his sister's lifeless body. Stunned, Liu Yi refused to accept reality. If he had known their end would be like this, he would have taken the game seriously from the start. Since the death of their parents, they had been alone, and Liu Yi's greatest dream was to take care of his sister, ensuring she had a promising future. He was dedicated to the game called Yuan World, but for him, it was just a pastime. Little did he know that this virtual world would take control of reality, granting players the abilities of their characters, leading to a global collapse. Liu Yi watched helplessly as his sister died, while two nearby players laughed and discussed their next steps. Suddenly, something awakened within him. He rose with three fixed thoughts. First, he hated that world where the rules were changed so easily. Second, he despised himself for not taking the game seriously. And above all, he harbored a deep hatred for his sister's killer, who clearly had enjoyed killing her. With a swift motion, Liu Yi grabbed something from the ground and threw it at the killer's head, making him lose his balance. The enemy, dazed, touched his head, confused about what had happened and where the object had come from. Liu Yi, lying on the ground, watched everything with a satisfied smile, happy that he had at least resisted a little. However, his fate was already sealed. Without hesitation, the killer decapitated Liu Yi, saying he would never allow a level 1 weakling to challenge him. Something, however, was wrong. Liu Yi woke up in his bed at home. Outside, an announcement echoed through the streets. There were only 8 hours left until the opening of the game Yuan World. Liu Yi stood up abruptly, unable to believe what was happening, as he remembered perfectly being killed. Looking around, he didn't recognize where he was until he realized it was his old apartment where he had lived 3 years ago. Suddenly, the door opened and a female voice echoed through the room. Liu Yi froze, unable to believe what he was seeing. In the hallway stood his sister, holding a box containing the authorization for the game Yuan World. With a trembling voice, he asked what year it was. Liu Yun, surprised by the question, replied jokingly that it seemed like he had woken up in a bad mood and said it was the year 2030. That hit him hard. Liu Yi stood still, unable to believe what he was hearing. Quickly getting up, he ran to the window. With his mouth slightly open, he realized that he had returned exactly to the day Yuan World was activated for the first time. Without hesitation, he hugged his sister tightly and promised himself that this time, he would not allow them to die. He would become the strongest player unless all of this was just a dream. It was July 27, 2030. The virtual reality game Yuan World was released, and on September 1, it took control of the world. All players received the abilities of their characters within the game. The marginalized and the lower classes of society, all of a sudden, acquired incredible powers. For the first time, they felt a strength they never imagined they could possess. Because of this, chaos ensued and endless wars over money and power began. Our protagonist followed the path of a player who only explored the game world. This led him to a tragic fate. Due to his low level, he ended up dying in Yuan World. However, by some miracle, he had an unexpected stroke of luck. He was reborn and returned 3 years back in time to the exact moment when the game was about to be released. This time, he was determined to become the strongest. Mentally, he returned to reality and was surprised when his sister pushed him, as he had unknowingly started hugging her. She was extremely embarrassed, thinking her brother was just bothering her. Scratching his head, he smiled awkwardly and said surprised that he really seemed to be doing that. We jump forward 8 hours in time to the moment of the Yuan World launch. Our protagonist put on the virtual reality glasses and lay down on his bed. He knew there were only 34 days left before the game would dominate the world. If he could become the strongest player during this period, he and his sister wouldn't die. Upon entering the game, he appeared in the initial plaza, where many players had already gathered. In the center, an administrator was about to demonstrate the power of a skill called strength. The first strike he delivered was simple, cutting a large rock in half. However, by concentrating his energy, he delivered another attack with a single movement, splitting the rock into 2 as if it were butter. The demonstration deeply shocked Liu Yi, who was watching with his mouth open. After the training session ended, the system transported our protagonist directly into the game. At the spawn point, several players were looking around in awe of this new world. However, Liu Yi had only one focus: to evolve as quickly as possible. He decided to choose the strength skill, as it was considered the most mysterious and determined the difference between an ordinary player and a true warrior. Without wasting time, he headed for the training pavilion. In the world of Yuan World, there were no fixed combat classes, just divisions based on the weapons used. Knowing this, Liu Yi wanted to master a weapon as quickly as possible, as the foundation of power lay in the mastery of its use. Once he reached 100% proficiency with a weapon, he would have complete control over the strength skill. With this urgency, he hurried to the weapon pavilion, worried that all the training areas would be crowded. However, to his surprise, when he entered, he realized the place was completely empty. Liu Yi didn't mind. He was determined to achieve his goal. He went straight to the weapon rack and began his selection. The katana was his favorite weapon, so he decided to start with it. However, he knew he should test all the available options. After 5 intense hours of training, he was exhausted. Still, he managed to master the katana completely, making it his main weapon. Despite the fatigue, he knew there was no time to waste. Without hesitation, he grabbed a longsword and began a new training cycle, pushing himself to the maximum and ignoring his own limits. In the weapon pavilion, a couple was walking through the corridors, admiring how realistic everything around them seemed. Suddenly, the girl noticed a training pavilion behind the guy. Curious about the sounds coming from there, she asked what could be inside. The guy looked up, saw the sign above the entrance, and commented that it was probably a training space. Without hesitation, the girl peeked around the corner of the door. That's where she saw our protagonist training tirelessly with a sword, refining his strikes against a wooden dummy. She noticed that Liu Yi was the only one training in that area, which struck her as quite strange. The couple approached the weapon rack but didn't pick any weapons. Instead, they wanted to understand how the training worked. They watched for a few minutes, then threw the weapons on the ground, saying that it was a boring activity reserved for losers. As they left, the guy explained that the training pavilion was only for increasing weapon proficiency, without offering other advantages. He further emphasized that to reach 100% proficiency, at least 10,000 strikes were necessary. The girl suggested that they leave and use that time to level up. The guy agreed immediately. Before leaving, the girl took one last look at Liu Yi. For some reason, he stuck in her memory. Liu Yi, however, didn't even notice that anyone had passed by. He kept striking endlessly, showing no intention of resting. On the first day, he mastered the katana and the halberd completely, but his much-anticipated special skill didn't appear. On the second day, he reached mastery in using the spear, axe, shield, and hammer. Still, his power didn't awaken. On the third day, while other players had already reached levels 10 to 20, Liu Yi was still at level 1 and his strength remained hidden. For a moment, he considered leveling up before continuing his training, but he quickly dismissed the thought. If he wanted to become the strongest player, he needed to obtain his skill at all costs. Nothing would stop him. Once again, the scene shifts to the street near the training pavilion. The same couple was walking by discussing the fact that a player had died. The punishment in Yuan World was harsh. Upon dying, the player lost all experience levels. In the middle of their conversation, the girl once again saw Liu Yi and was incredibly surprised. He was still training. The guy beside her was also shocked. He said there were far more exciting ways to play, much better than spending days training non-stop. The girl, intrigued, couldn't understand why Liu Yi kept at it. Her friend suggested that maybe he knew some hidden secret. Excited, he thought of trying to master a weapon as well. However, the girl interrupted his idea. She stated that it was pointless as Liu Yi had been training for 3 whole days and nothing had changed. While other players reached level 20, he was still only improving his weapon skills. He wouldn't have a chance to win this way. Liu Yi, however, completely ignored the couple. He had a goal and he wouldn't waste time on distractions. The girl grew irritated by his obsession. She said Liu Yi seemed like a game addict, and even if he did become the strongest fighter, she would never try weapon training. For her, time would be better spent leveling up. Losing patience to stay there any longer, she grabbed her friend's arm and insisted they leave. They needed to gain more experience as quickly as possible. Days later, our protagonist received an unexpected notification. He had mastered 18 types of weapons and, as a result, earned the title of Master Armorer. Now he was able to use the skills and characteristics of the other 17 weapons with any primary weapon of his choice. With a whip in his hands, he was exhausted and remained motionless, processing the message in front of his eyes. He couldn't understand what was happening. He had perfected all possible bladed weapons, but his long-awaited special skill never manifested. Because of this, he decided to discard the bladed weapons. Maybe his true talent lay in firearms. Without wasting any time, he headed to the firearms pavilion. As he walked, he reflected on something curious. In his previous life, he had never encountered a player who used power with firearms. Upon entering the pavilion, a magnificent hall was revealed before him. There was an immense variety of weapons displayed on metal racks. Without hesitation, Liu Yi chose a pistol. The days were passing quickly. More than 5 days had passed, and he was sure that the other players had already reached level 30. Meanwhile, he was still at level 1. Looking at the vast selection of weapons, Liu Yi felt a tightness in his chest. There were so many options, and because of this, Yuan World could take over the world before he mastered them all. For a moment, he wondered if it was worth continuing. But then, the memory of his sister's death came flooding back. That level 20 player who killed her. Blood boiled in his veins. He had no choice. He couldn't turn back. Without power, he would never become the strongest player. Taking a deep breath, he raised the pistol and began his training. Even if his fate was to die again, he would never give up. Meanwhile, in the training pavilion, the girl who had once mocked Liu Yi's dedication decided to return to check on his progress. However, when she looked inside, she found no one. Surprised, she thought he had given up and left, never to return. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed through the area. The deepening sound froze her in place. What was that? Instinctively, she followed the noise and climbed the stairs toward the firearms pavilion. Peering around the corner of the door, she was stunned. Liu Yi had stopped shooting. The reason? He had completely destroyed the training target. Around him, a strange greenish aura flickered, as if his very existence was shifting. The girl covered her mouth with her hands, stifling a scream. Her eyes reflected pure horror. What the hell was happening to him? Liu Ye, for his part, remained frozen. He wasn't looking at anything, as if lost in the void, but in truth he was reading the notification he had waited for so long. The message said, "Congratulations, you have reached 100% mastery with a pistol. As a reward, you have acquired a new skill." A shiver ran down Liu Ye's body. He had finally received his power. Now for the first time he felt prepared for the impending disaster. A subtle laugh escaped his lips. The next step was clear: level up and catch up with the other players. His statistics were basic as all five. The only exception was his special endurance, which had only 1 point. Additionally, a new icon for passive skills appeared, but it was empty. Heading for the exit, Liu Yu was ready to start leveling up. However, as he reached the door, he noticed a girl standing in the hallway. She tried to act casually, looking away and whistling a melody, pretending not to have seen anything. Liu Yi, however, didn't waste time wondering if she had seen something or not. He simply walked past her as if she wasn't there. The girl, in turn, felt strangely embarrassed. The feeling of irritation took over her, not understanding why she felt so uncomfortable. She wanted to ask what had happened inside the pavilion, wanted to understand what that strange aura around Liu Yi was, but she hesitated. In the end, she remained along the way. Liu Yi overheard rumors about Yuan World. The most relevant information was that the game had reached 10 million online players. This only confirmed his concern. Time is passing far too quickly. Arriving at the store, Liu Yi chose his equipment. He purchased a low-level pistol called the White Dragon, costing 500 coins. He also bought a box with 300 regular bullets for 300 coins and a low-level dagger that cost him 200 coins. In total, he spent 1,000 coins on his new acquisitions. Upon leaving the store, he felt a slight sense of discouragement. The prices were way too high, and the fact that the in-game currency had the same value as real money made everything even more expensive. To him, the company behind Yuan World had overdone it with the item prices. Still, he was satisfied with his new weapons. As he examined the dagger, an idea struck him. Without hesitation, he activated his special skill, Master Armor. This skill allowed him to surpass the limitations of weapons and apply the powers of one weapon to another. The first real test of his new power was about to begin. Determined to test his abilities, Liu Yi headed to the Mirror Kingdom Game Company. This place allowed players to create a mirror copy of themselves to fight against it. The rules were simple. If a player managed to defeat their copy, they would receive extra money and experience. However, there were 2 conditions to participate. The player needed to be at least 5 levels below their copy and also pay 10% of their gold to enter the fight. For Liu Yi, these conditions were not a problem. In fact, it was the perfect scenario for him. He was still at level 1, but now he had real power. While walking through the Mirror Kingdom Hall, a shout of frustration echoed throughout the area. 2 players had just respawned, complaining about the extreme difficulty of the mirrored copies. It seemed they had lost everything they had worked for. Nearby, 2 other players were watching the scene with irony. They mocked the defeated players, and when they noticed Liu Yi, they turned their attention to him. One of them, noticing the pistol hanging from the boy's waist, laughed in disdain. To him, it was the worst possible weapon choice in the game. The other player also showed contempt, convinced that Liu Yi was nothing more than an inexperienced rookie, deluded into thinking he could win with such inferior equipment. Liu Yi remained silent, simply observing the players. They had no idea what he was capable of now. After confirming his decision, Liu Yi mentally prepared himself for his first battle in the Mirror Kingdom. He knew that, due to his lack of experience, the odds were against him. However, he also understood that he had no choice but to fight. He accessed the system menu to familiarize himself with the interface. After navigating for a moment, another notification appeared, asking for confirmation to face a mirror player. Despite his fear, Liu Yi confirmed his participation, fully aware of the consequences. The system then displayed a notification requesting confirmation of the participation fee, which amounted to 100 coins. After accepting, a second notification appeared, reminding him that once inside the Mirror Kingdom, players could not leave until the battle was completed. A few moments later, Liu Yi found himself transported to the arena. His opponent was a player, ready for combat. The countdown began and the battle was about to start in 10 seconds. When the countdown reached 5 seconds, Liu Yi's nerves took over. He had never fought anyone voluntarily and the fear of confrontation was overwhelming. His leg began to shake involuntarily, distracting him even more. Trying to calm himself, he patted his leg. However, this distraction caused him to miss the start of the battle. His opponent, wielding a red sword, immediately launched an attack. Liu Yi thought everything was lost before it even began, but to his surprise, he managed to dodge the first strike and attempted to shoot at the enemy. Unfortunately, all of his shots missed, and as he lost his balance, he nearly fell. The enemy kept advancing and, taking advantage of Liu Yi's instability, easily disarmed him. Now, without weapons, Liu Yi had to face the red sword using only his physical strength. The opponent seemed certain of his victory. Still, in that moment of doubt, Liu Yi realized that he couldn't give up. This was his second chance at life and he wasn't going going to waste it. He activated his Master Archer skill, which allowed him to modify the properties of the blade. With the increased strength of the blade, Liu Yi was able to stop the opponent's sword strike with ease. The enhanced power of the blade allowed him to counterattack with a force he didn't know he had. With skill and precision, he cut the enemy's sword, disabling it, and then defeated him swiftly. Despite the victory, Liu Yi was still trembling with nerves. His hands were shaking and his breathing was heavy, a reaction he couldn't control. He felt a wave of frustration for not being able to calm down after the victory. Meanwhile, a few minutes earlier, two other players were walking through the arena, discussing their plans to gather members for their teams. They talk about how difficult it had become to win battles in the Mirror Kingdom, especially with the large clans competing against smaller teams. As Liu Yi celebrated his victory, the two players observing him were shocked by the result. They couldn't believe that a level 1 player with minimal equipment had managed to defeat an opponent 5 levels higher. In reality, the two players weren't looking for allies, but rather betting money on other players, hoping to profit. One of them quickly checked the odds of the bets on a site called Backstage Garden, eager to see how much they would earn from their wagers. The other, on the other hand, was carefully analyzing Liu Yi's movements, intrigued by how a player of such a low level could defeat their opponent. Liu Yi watched his opponent strikes closely as the countdown to the start of the battle continued. The guy with green hair observed every move Liu Yi made, saying that the answer had arrived, while the second player commented that it was an excellent choice, never taking his eyes off Liu Yi. Both were eager to see which mirror copy Liu Yi would choose, hoping to place their bets. Liu Yi checked his own stats. He had reached level 5, and his attributes had doubled, but he still felt weak. He realized he needed to become stronger, that he had to overcome his fear of battle, because if he didn't, he would die soon. With determination, he immediately chose his next opponent, a mirror copy ranked 55th, known as Strikes. The system teleported him to the arena almost instantly. The two guys who had been watching Liu Yi were waiting to place their bets on his fight, but were confused when they saw who his opponent would be. They were shocked when they realized that Liu Yi had chosen a level 10 mirror copy, nicknamed Strikes. The guy with green hair snapped back to reality, realizing that Liu Yi had chosen the strongest opponent possible from the hundreds of level 10 players. He wondered what would happen to their bet, hoping it hadn't been placed yet, but the guy with white hair revealed that the bet had already been made, and there was nothing they could do about it. He hoped that, in case of defeat, the green-haired friend wouldn't tell anyone about the bet, as he didn't want to be embarrassed. The betting organizer then announced the odds for the match, showing the bets placed on Liu Yi and Strikes. Seeing the odds, the two guys felt discouraged. The total amount bet on Strikes' victory exceeded 200,000, and they had already lost all hope. At that moment, Strikes appeared before Liu Yi. Strikes, with a katana in hand, was equipped with the Persistent Fighter set, while Liu Yi, a level 5 player, only had a pistol, a dagger, and basic gear. The countdown to the start of the battle began, and as soon as Liu Yi saw his opponent, his legs began to shake again. This angered him. To stop the shaking, he drove the dagger into one of his legs. With only 2 seconds left before the battle began, he took a combat stance, determined not to repeat the mistakes of his first fight. When the battle started, Liu Yi wasted no time and immediately advanced towards Strikes, skillfully dodging his attacks. Although Liu Yi's pistol was powerful, his accuracy wasn't the best, and Strikes managed to dodge or block most of the shots. After a while, Strikes grew tired of this and quickly disarmed Liu Yi. Without hesitation, Strikes went in for a fatal strike. It seemed impossible to dodge the blow, but Liu Yi wasn't ready to give up. He activated his special ability and his eyes glowed blue. Liu Yi made an incredible leap forward, narrowly dodging Strikes' deadly strike. After sliding back a bit, he realized that Strikes wasn't pursuing him. With a moment to recover, Liu Yi analyzed the situation. His health was at 20 out of 100 and his cognitive power was at 28 out of 30. The battle had just begun, but Liu Yi was focused on his survival. Liu Yi was one step away from defeat. His regular attacks couldn't even scratch his opponent, and he realized he had chosen an adversary he couldn't defeat. He should have opted for a weaker fighter and used that time to level up rather than rushing so quickly. But still, after a moment of doubt, Liu Yi returned to his combat stance, almost finding it funny how hard things were becoming. He believed that in order to overcome his fear, he needed to keep fighting and not give up. Considering that standing still wasn't a good option, he decided to charge directly at his enemy. At one point, the hero turned to the side to avoid being struck by a fatal blow that would have wiped out his entire health. However, Liu Yi underestimated his opponent's speed. In mere seconds, Strikes was behind him, catching him by surprise. Liu Yi realized he had no more chances to win, so he decided to risk it all. Before the fatal blow could land, he turned to face Strikes, drawing his pistol and shooting. In a final clash, they exchanged fatal blows. Strikes' katana cut Liu Yi in half, while Liu Yi's pistol shot destroyed Strikes' head. The system determined that Liu Yi inflicted fatal damage faster than Strikes, and therefore he was declared the winner. Its reward was a large amount of experience, money, and a level up. Now Liu Yi was much stronger at level 13, with all of his attributes increased to 17, except for resistance, which only increased by 1 point. He let out a sigh of relief, realizing that he had been on the verge of death, and yet he had won that incredible battle. Many more notifications arrived, the most important being that he had reached level 10, and now his resurrection ability had evolved to the point where he could choose his development path. Meanwhile, the two guys who had bet on Liu Yi's victory were surrounded by a crowd and pressed against the wall. Those who had lost the bet were required to hand over all the money to the other participants. One of the guys nearly started crying, asking if there was an option to give half of the money instead of all of it. The one-eyed gang pointed at them and said there was no such option, and they couldn't escape this easy loss. The guy with white hair couldn't take it anymore and shouted, saying he couldn't believe they really thought they had already won when the outcome wasn't even decided yet. Gang, pointing at the board, firmly stated that Strikes would win, as he couldn't lose to a newbie. If that happened, he would be ready to cause a huge ruckus with the bets. Before Gang said this, Strikes was considered one of the leaders among the level 10 mirror copies. However, moments later the board was updated and everyone was shocked to see that Strikes had been defeated. The crowd around them could hardly believe it, and their mouths dropped open in astonishment. Their world instantly crumbled. The guy with green hair was overjoyed, happy with the victory, and the two friends were thrilled that they had won. Meanwhile, Liu Yi, the protagonist, returned victorious from the arena. The list suddenly appeared before him. He looked at it for the first time and didn't fully understand what it meant, but decided to finish the game. When he was about to leave the game, his sister came into the room and called him to eat. Upon entering the kitchen, Liu Yi wasted no time and started eating immediately. Yun, his sister, says she had prepared his favorite mushrooms, but Liu Yi didn't even pay attention to her words, so immersed was he in his thoughts about Yuan World, where he had discovered two new abilities he didn't even know he had. The first ability was the Flame of Invasion, which had an incredible effect. The damage per second dropped from 50 to 25, but the total damage was around 250 health points. Along with his abilities, Liu Yi also thought about the dangers posed by his opponents and considered the idea of forming his own team. After eating quickly, he thanked his sister and headed back to his room, which surprised her, as he had barely eaten a plate of food. This even hurt her a bit, and she thought that he would need to find someone to cook for him. Now back in Yuan World, within the Mirror World's buildings, a man was on his knees before Game Z, begging to be allowed to keep half of the money as had been proposed. However, the man wasn't so simple and continued to beg, saying that all the money he had bet on Strike's victory wasn't his, but his family's. If he lost it all, he would likely face severe punishment. Gang Z, still mocking him, said that just a minute ago he had rejected such an offer, and now the man was offering the same thing. Before he could finish speaking, a guy with red hair appeared and slammed Gang Z's head against the wall, saying that he would have to return all the lost money from the bet against Strikes. The guy with red hair was named Jack and was from the New Order Guild, responsible for the Mirror World. Gang was pressed against the wall, trying to explain that the person who defeated Strikes had nothing to do with him, as he had only placed the bet and didn't know that Liu Yi would choose the Strikes copy to defeat him. But what Gang said to Jack didn't bother him at all. Jack replied that in the end the guy with white hair was the one who came out on top, and even if Gang managed to escape responsibility, things would be dealt with differently in the real world. Gang tried to defend himself as best as he could, and in order to avoid trouble in real life, offered all the money he had earned from the bet. However, Jack suddenly refused, saying he didn't need it and let the poor man go. Gang thought for a moment, and with a very serious expression on his face, said that he had nothing else to offer as compensation. Jack, with a terrifying look, merely commented that Gang would have to do him a favor, and of course he had no choice but to agree. Now back to our hero. After dinner, he entered the game again to continue leveling up. He knew he couldn't hesitate, as he needed to be well prepared for Judgment Day. Soon, Liu Yi received a notification confirming his choice, which was to improve the skill Cure Key. Without hesitation, he confirmed the upgrade and soon received 3 notifications. The first was about the skill he had chosen. The second informed him that his counter was complete and his combat strength was now 15.6. Additionally, he received a new title called Low-Level Warrior. One of the biggest surprises for Liu Yi was realizing that by choosing the skill, he had acquired a double attribute and several of his stats had increased significantly. When he looked at his stats, he was very surprised, as some of his attributes had risen considerably. When he reached level 100, Liu Yi became much weaker, and he realized this because although he had only reached level 13, with the new attributes and bonuses, he was now at the same level as a level 26 character. Liu Yi then reflected on the possibility of defeating a level 20 Strikes with his current strength. However, from being an insecure guy, Liu Yi transformed into someone confident, determined to challenge Strikes, considering him his opponent and wanting to test his strength against him. Next, a notification appeared before him, asking for confirmation for a battle with Strikes, to which he promptly responded, confirming. A few seconds after choosing his opponent, the bets for the fight started appearing at the neighborhood betting houses and in the player chat. Someone placed a bet, and two guys whom Jack had asked to spread the information began to promote it. One of them bet all his money on the protagonist's victory, which outraged the man with golden hair. They didn't need to place bets, but the guy with white hair was convinced that now Jack couldn't do anything because even if he tried, he wouldn't get support from his group called the New Order. The blonde guy noticed the disdainful smile from his friend and deduced that Jack had forced him to promote the odds in favor of the protagonist. However, he didn't understand the significance of the situation, as it was obvious that no one would bet on Liu Yi and the odds would be very low. But the guy didn't respond because his task was only to cause confusion. The scene shifted to the battle arena within the Mirror Kingdom, where the fight was about to begin in 10 seconds. On one side, Strikes level 20, armed with 2 katanas and advanced armor. On the other, Liu Yi level 13, with only a pistol, a dagger, and beginner gear. Liu Yi began to reflect, thinking that with enough cognitive power reserve, he would be able to predict the right moment to easily destroy Strikes. The system announced the start of the battle. The protagonist didn't hesitate and attacked immediately. Strikes managed to defend with his katanas, deflecting all the bullets. While attacking, Liu Yi tried to get closer, reflecting the blows. He noticed that the dual attributes had practically eliminated the strength gap between them, which boosted his confidence. Now battles with high-level opponents wouldn't be as intense as before. Dodging from side to side, Liu Yi only used his pistol and reflected on how much stronger he had become. He allowed the enemy to get close enough so he could attack with his daggers and aim for Strike's head, planning to end the fight in the final seconds. With a smile on his face, he was about to kill the opponent and finish the battle. Strikes, on the other hand, couldn't believe that a weak, low-level player was able to attack him and stood frozen, with no reaction. At the moment Liu Yi saw his opponent's face, he became confused and didn't know what to do, canceling the pistol shot. As the hero had slowed Strikes down, there was enough time for a counterattack. However, after dodging, Liu Yi jumped backward, avoiding any damage. Suddenly, he was overwhelmed with a wave of anger as he remembered his opponent, stopping his action and holding his head, unsure of how to proceed. He didn't understand why he hadn't shot and thought of the fact that he was afraid and also that he simply feared death. Looking at his opponent and the weapon, the young man thought he would never be able to take his fate into his own hands, and most importantly, that he would never grow and would continue to fear everyone in his way. Tightening the weapon harder, he understood that his future was being decided right there. Despite his opponent, the girl also understood that only one winner would leave this battle and the protagonist's fate was at stake. With an impressive leap towards Strikes, both decided to collide head-on. Strikes delivered the first blow, which should have decapitated our hero, but Liu Yi, in turn, managed to dodge, quickly moving behind him. Then he grabbed him by the head, pointed the gun, and in that moment, his thoughts were clear. He had already grown to become a completely different person. Without hesitation for even a second, Liu Yi fired, and soon 3 notifications appeared before him. The first said that he had defeated Strikes, the second that his level had increased, and the third that he had reached level 20, now able to choose how to further develop his power. The protagonist's face was incredibly serious. He understood that now not only had he grown, but he was also ahead of all the other players. Meanwhile, in the lobby, those whom had bet on our hero couldn't believe what they were seeing, as they had truly won. Then, unexpectedly, the guy with green hair commented that the bets didn't affect the other players. Even though Jack had opened his second bet on the level 20 Strikes, he still lost to Liu Yi. Now, everyone knew how strong he was. The same guy began to think that after defeating the level 20 Strikes, Liu Yi had probably reached level 22 or even 23. He concluded that Liu Yi could only fight against level 30 mirror copies, whose rewards were very high. The hero knew it was Strikes, but the guy couldn't understand how Liu Yi had so much confidence that he could defeat a level 30 Strikes mirror copy with 100% certainty. They assumed that as soon as the protagonist faced the level 30 Strikes, he would likely lose and be in great danger. As soon as Liu Yi teleported back to the Mirror Kingdom, he realized that not only had he grown, but he had also placed himself ahead of the other players. Looking at the tournament standings, he saw a level 30 mirror copy of Strikes occupying first place. If, in previous battles, Liu Yi had proven to himself that he was stronger than the other players, now he needed to destroy the level 30 mirror copy of Strikes, as most players said it was invincible. Before entering the battle, rumors started circulating around the protagonist, saying that one of the players had restarted to take revenge on the level 30 Strikes, but in the end, lost. The invincible copy and the strongest fighter were attributed to Strikes for a reason, and the most important thing, he had heard that, thanks to this copy, the New Order Guild had become the strongest because of Strikes. After that, Liu Yi didn't hesitate to call the system in front of him with a murderous look as he was eager for the fight with Strikes. The system asked again if Liu Yi really wanted to enter the battle against the level 30 mirror copy of Strikes. Of course, he didn't hesitate, and the system immediately transferred him. Jack, who was observing Liu Yi from afar, ordered all his subordinates to open bets on Strike's victory. We shifted to 2 guys, and one of them opened a bet on the protagonist's victory, which caused the green-haired man to lose his patience. He believed Liu Yi had no chance against the level 30 Strikes. However, the white-haired guy didn't listen to his words but stated that he believed in Liu Yi. Soon we were transported to the arena, where the enemy strikes level 30 was. His weapon was quite unusual, a katana named Last Will, and the armor called Fierce. Liu Yi, on the other hand, was at level 23 with a pistol, a common dagger and beginner equipment, which seemed to indicate that he had no chance at all. After a moment, a notification appeared before Liu Yi, informing him that his intelligence attribute had surpassed 100 points and the knowledge power of intelligence had increased by +1. Focused on the notifications, Liu Yi didn't notice that the battle had started. Strikes didn't waste time, attacked immediately, dealing 411 damage to Liu Yi's health. Liu Yi was shocked, as he only had 18 health left, and he couldn't believe Strike's speed. The second attack should have finished Liu Yi, but somehow he managed to defend with his dagger and didn't die. With each second of the battle, Liu Yi became more frustrated with his opponent, realizing the severity of the fight. If he had defended just 1 second later, he would have died and wouldn't have had time to apply healing. With great difficulty, he managed to repel the attack and dodge backward while dealing damage to Strikes with his pistol. Each bullet flew with impressive precision. Liu Yi didn't want to prolong the fight and tried to finish the battle as quickly as possible. However, all of his attempts to hurt the opponent were in vain, as Strikes easily dodged them, giving the impression that everything was happening in slow motion for him. With a single movement, Strikes was within Liu Yi's reach, about to end the fight with a blow. Liu Yi hadn't expected such a twist, and to his surprise, Strikes, who barely accepted the dagger attack, still managed to deal damage to the protagonist, forcing him to heal constantly. Liu Yi couldn't withstand the attack, and for a moment, if he had reacted, he would have moved on to the next world in the game. However, he recovered in time, dodging Strike's attack by crouching and moving to the side. Liu Yi immediately increased the distance between them and tried once more to deal damage to Strikes with his pistol. Suddenly, Liu Yi plunged into his own thoughts and realized that despite his stats being similar to those of a level 46 Strikes, Strikes was still managing to pressure him. But after composing himself, Liu Yi was not willing to give up. He understood that if this was all of Strike's power, he could easily deal incredible damage in a few seconds and secure the victory. That's when Liu Yi decided to use the skill Blessing Study. The skill increased all the target's stats, along with activating an uncommon state, lasting for 1 minute. Liu Yi also studied the curse, which could cause 1 of 10 effects such as weakness, aging, lethargy, stupidity, fatigue, poisoning, hallucinations, perception changes, chaos, and madness. After learning the skill, a notification appeared before the protagonist, saying that the blessing had been learned. His combat power was 15. But the most important thing was that the guy's stats had increased several times, giving the protagonist a significant advantage over Strikes. Liu Yi didn't hesitate and shouted to activate the blessing, as he understood he didn't have enough levels to defeat Strikes, but he trusted his attributes to do so. Moments later, a notification appeared, informing him that he had spent 400 cognitive power points and that all of his attributes had increased by 200 for exactly 1 minute, after which they would return to normal. A white aura began to surround Liu Yi, spreading terror to all who stood in front of him. There was this aura that gave him courage, as he knew that by activating the skill for a full minute, he would have enough power to destroy Strikes. Strikes, caught off guard, stood still preparing for the protagonist's next attack, but decided to take a more proactive approach. He charged at full speed, intending to finish Liu Yi off once and for all, so that he wouldn't have to face him again. Liu Yi briefly thought that once he defeated Strikes, everyone would immediately assume that he hid incredible skills and attributes, making him known as the strongest player. But as he regained his focus, Liu Yi realized that the enemy was closing in rapidly while he dodged from side to side. Even dodging, it wasn't enough to avoid Strikes, who was already close enough to attack. Liu Yi then aimed his pistol and fired. The first bullet hit Strikes in the chest, causing him to halt his attack and become confused. After the first shot, Liu Yi didn't stop, continuing to fire at the enemy relentlessly. A few seconds later, more than 10 holes were visible in Strike's body, which should have indicated he was down. But suddenly, he was completely unharmed and ready to continue the fight. With a smile on his face, the enemy seemed to have understood what was happening. While reloading his magazine, Strikes realized that firstly, the protagonist's stats were much higher than those of players of the same level, and additionally, he possessed passive abilities that activated during critical moments. This was Strike's true strength. Moreover, the system of the Mirror Kingdom worked against NEP players, which made victories even harder to achieve. Liu Yi understood that he was an exception, and so he took a combat stance. With the duration of the blessing nearing its end, he knew he needed to finish off Strikes before then. Determined to prevent the enemy from dying prematurely, Liu Yi began attacking Strikes. There were only 25 seconds left of his active ability. As he attacked, he knew he couldn't afford to lose, as the current goal was to surpass his past and take control of his destiny, something he had failed to do before. With each new attack, Strikes got closer to the protagonist. With 15 seconds remaining, Liu Yi jumped backward and launched a counterattack. As time ticked away, Liu Yi continued to attack and repel Strike's strikes, not giving the enemy a moment's rest. Just a few seconds before the skill ended, a bullet shot straight into Strike's forehead, destroying his armor. Strike began to shake violently, and his weapon fell from his hands. He stopped attacking, and a moment later, completely exhausted, he collapsed, showing clear sign that he no longer had any life left. The system notification began to dissolve. The enemy's body lay on the ground, and Liu Yi stared at it, unable to believe that he had defeated the most powerful opponent in the Mirror Kingdom's copy world. He already imagined the comments that would follow his victory, as now he would be called the strongest player, the one who managed to defeat a level 30 enemy, the mighty Strikes. Moreover, his hidden abilities were incredible, granting him the properties of an invincible warrior. Someone commented that these titles meant nothing to level 30 players, as they belonged to completely different worlds in terms of strength. To illustrate, one of the spectators explained that, at most, a level 30 player was like the ground beneath the protagonist's feet, meaning they would never reach his level. The protagonist's imagination made his self-esteem soar, further boosting his morale after his victory over Strikes. Then several notifications appeared on his interface. The first congratulated him for his victory over Strikes, while the second informed him of his massive rewards, both in money and experience. He could barely contain his happiness as he not only gained money and experience but also overcame a huge fear. At that moment, the system teleported him back to the Mirror Kingdom. In the waiting room, Jack watched the battle, unable to believe that Liu Yi had defeated the strongest copy in the Mirror Kingdom. What angered him even more, however, was the money he had lost by betting on Strike's victory. Meanwhile, two players who had bet on the protagonist were euphoric. They jumped for joy, and a white-haired young man smiled at the surrounding stones, saying that he had been right about Liu Yi and that his bet had paid off. For that reason, he suggested that from now on, everyone should always follow their instincts. However, his friend grabbed his arm and warned that it was too early to celebrate, as many things could still happen. He then advised that they both disconnect from the game and in real life move to another apartment to avoid being found by Jack. The scene shifted to the real world at the protagonist's house, where he was sitting on his bed, silently reflecting on his victory over Strikes, the strongest copy in the game. Suddenly, the door opened and a girl appeared from another room, commenting that he was probably hungry and inviting him to eat something. However, he had other plans. With a smile on his face, he said they would go out for a walk and he would take her for a barbecue. As they went down the stairs, the girl asked her brother where he had gotten the money from, since restaurants were expensive for them. Laughing, he replied that she wouldn't believe it, as he had won a large sum in the game, and that's why they needed to toast to their luck. His sister accepted without questioning and didn't ask for further details. The next day, still at the protagonist's house, he made an online purchase. After completing the transaction, he received confirmation that the order would arrive in 2 months. Sitting at the table, he couldn't believe it, as in just 24 days, Yuan World was supposed to take control of the real world, making those 2 months feel like an agonizing wait. Still, he had no choice, as the nearest store he checked was out of stock. Instead of letting it get him down, he gathered all his determination and decided that he needed to push himself even harder while waiting for the delivery. The scene then shifts, and we see two girls walking along the shoreline. They were extremely embarrassed, as all the passersby were staring at them. Suddenly, the best friend decided to ask Yan why Liu Yi had invited the girl on a date. Thoughts began to flood her mind, and she feared that something terrible had happened. However, Yun kept it reading and smiled from ear to ear and remained silent for a moment, immersed in her thoughts. She was wondering how she would introduce her brother to her friend, as that was her true goal. After all, the girl was incredibly attractive, came from a good family, and most importantly, had a wonderful character. If she became her brother's fiancé, Yun wouldn't have to worry about anything anymore. A moment later, returning to reality, Yun smiled and replied that her brother had missed her a lot, which was why he wanted to see her. Without much expression, the friend asked where she had been lately, since she hadn't even responded in their workgroup. Yun began to suspect that her friend might have a boyfriend, but even if that were true, she wouldn't give up on her plans, as she had already firmly decided that she would go out with Liu Yi. Nyan, sighing, adjusted her cap and said she didn't even know how to explain it. Suddenly, the girl shouted loudly, revealing that her parents were forcing her to play an incredible online game. Yun was confused by that unexpected response and didn't know what to say. Meanwhile, we are transported to a local bar. Jack, filled with rage, struck a red-haired girl whom he had called over in an attempt to calm him down. The blow was brutal, and the girl fell to the ground, hitting it violently. Even while injured and struggling to stay conscious, Jack continued to attack her. He hated the way she tried to calm him, as he felt that she pitied him, and that was something he despised. A crowd began to gather around, outraged by what they were witnessing, but no one had the courage to intervene. After all, this wasn't the first time Jack had acted this way. When he noticed the stares of the people around him, he became even angrier and asked what they were whispering about him. However, no one responded. On the contrary, one by one, they began to disperse, running in different directions to avoid meeting the same fate as the girl lying on the ground. Still dissatisfied, Jack spat on the girl before picking up his phone upon hearing someone call him a friend. He answered the call immediately and asked if the person on the other end had found the protagonist's address. The answer was negative, but the person assured him they had a plan. Jack listened carefully and without hesitation asked if the plan was truly foolproof. When he heard that success was guaranteed 100%, his expression changed. His furious eyes made it clear that he longed for revenge against Liu Yi and wouldn't stop until he got it. With a voice filled with malice, Jack said that as soon as they found the guy, he would send the rest of the money immediately. The conversation ended and the scene shifts to Liu Yi, who at that moment had just entered the game. He stood in front of the Mirror Kingdom building, reflecting on the maximum level of the mirror copies, which was level 30. He understood that at his current level, he could no longer evolve there, as the enemies were far too weak for him. With that in mind, he decided it was time to leave. Turning around, he started walking toward the destroyed kingdom, a place where he could become even stronger. However, as he stopped and looked at his own appearance, he realized he couldn't continue wearing his starting armor. It was time to think about buying a new one. Liu Yi walked to a weapon store. As he approached the storefront, a system window popped up in front of him, displaying the available items for purchase. However, upon seeing the prices, he froze for a few seconds. His expression made it clear that he simply couldn't spend so much on armor. Disappointed, he left the store and continued walking through the Mirror Kingdom. Soon he realized there was no reason to stay there anymore, as it was impossible to find the necessary resources to craft equipment. Therefore, he decided to go to the destroyed kingdom, where he could easily obtain the materials and craft level 20 equipment. Although he had enough money to directly buy level 20 equipment, he preferred not to rush. After all, he would soon reach level 30, and moreover, he needed to manage his money in the real world as well. Without wasting any time, he set off for the destroyed kingdom. There, he intended to join a team, as he knew that would accelerate his evolution and help him obtain equipment more quickly. Upon arrival, he saw that many teams were recruiting players to explore dungeons of different levels. Some accepted level 20 players, while others were looking for level 30 players for harder raids. He stood aside for a moment and overheard a conversation between two players talking about a new guild order. They mentioned a recent attack on the level 40 Chaos Dungeon, in which 10 players participated, but all were defeated and had their stats reset. Liu Yi knew that there were only 4 requirements to complete a dungeon, regardless of the team size. In fact, the more people participated, the greater the reward at the end. However, there was a crucial detail. Once inside the dungeon, there was no exit until it was fully completed. Furthermore, in Yuan World, dying in the destroyed kingdom meant a complete reset and the loss of all equipment. For this reason, teams were extremely selective when recruiting new members. With the skills he had, Liu Yi believed he would be accepted without any problem. Convinced of this, he approached the first recruiter, but was immediately rejected as the team only accepted level 30 players. He tried again in another group, but was turned away due to his low-quality equipment. On the third attempt, he didn't even get a chance to speak, as the team was already full and didn't need any new players. Frustrated and completely disappointed, he dropped to his knees. He couldn't believe that no one wanted to accept him, even after he had defeated Strikes, a level 30 enemy. He thought his strength should be taken into account regardless of his level or equipment, as he had already proven that he wasn't a weak player. Disheartened, he began to consider exploring the easier dungeons to obtain basic equipment, but he knew that would be a long and tedious process. Even so, he gathered the strength to stand up and was preparing to take this only option when suddenly, he heard footsteps behind him. Soon after, a voice announced that a team was looking for one more member. Curious, Liu Yi turned around to see what it was about, not understanding exactly who the offer was directed to. In front of him was Jack, smiling. With a calculating look, Jack suggested that he join the expedition in a dangerous level 35 dungeon designed for 10-player teams. Exchanging glances with Jack, Liu Yi realized there was something strange about that proposal. Still, Jack kept talking, assuring him that the team was strong enough to handle the challenges alone. They just needed one more person to complete the group. For the raid portal to be activated, one more player was required. Surprised, the protagonist couldn't believe what he was seeing. Moreover, he felt that he had seen Jack somewhere before, but couldn't quite remember exactly where. Jack, without giving Liu Yi time to think, said that if he wasn't interested, he would look for someone else. Not wanting to miss this opportunity, Liu Yi immediately interrupted him and accepted the offer. Jack merely waved his hand and told him to follow him. Together, they went to the entrance of the level 30 portal, meant for a group of 10 players. When they reached the meeting point near the destroyed royal portal, they found a crowd. The players around them were wearing impressive armor, which led many to comment on the leader's unexpected choice. No one had expected him to recruit a rookie armed only with a simple pistol. Liu Yi observed the other players and quickly realized that they were very well equipped. The purple outfits indicated that more than half of the team had timeless rarity equipment. He held his head, thoughtful, wondering if he could at least steal some of that equipment. Suddenly, one of the players shouted that now that everyone was gathered, they should leave immediately, as he wanted to reach level 40 as fast as possible. A bald man approached with a smile and said that once they reached level 40, they would need to change their equipment, and if that was the case, he could give his old gear to the group. However, the player simply smiled and declined the offer unless someone carried his weapon with 3 rare items from the inventory, which no one accepted. The group then began moving toward the portal, with Liu Yi following slowly behind them. Observing the players, he noticed that they all seemed to know each other well and couldn't understand why they had called him for this level 35 mission. However, upon noticing the malicious smiles from the team, he realized that this friendship hid ulterior motives. The portal finally opened, revealing an immense desert landscape. At the center of the scene, there was only a mysterious crystal. Jack and another player were the first to cross the portal and began analyzing the environment. Soon, one of the team members noticed that the mission objective was to protect the crystal. Jack immediately took charge and ordered everyone to surround the crystal and ensure its safety. Everyone followed the instruction except Liu Yi, who hesitated for a moment. It was then that Jack warned that anyone who allowed the monsters to reach the crystal would have to pay for the damage with their own money. Liu Yi was surprised by the team's organization, although he didn't show it. Still not in a hurry to position himself, he watched the crystal carefully. Suddenly, a notification appeared before his eyes. The mission was loading. A few seconds later, another message informed him that the task was to protect the crystal from 3 waves of enemies. At the bottom of the screen, he saw the crystal's health bar and the penalty for failure: death for all players. It was then that a shout interrupted his thoughts. Someone announced that the monsters were attacking. Liu Yi looked toward the desert but saw nothing but dense fog. However, he soon realized that this fog was not ordinary. It had been generated by the monsters themselves. From within the smoke screen, an enemy emerged at high speed. The creature looked like a spider but had absurdly large fangs. The bald man shouted for Liu Yi to approach the crystal, warning that if he didn't follow orders, he could be killed. Without arguing, the protagonist obeyed. Meanwhile, a swarm of monstrous insects flew toward the bald man, who was holding an enormous axe. It seemed that his game was about to end right there, but the guy had completely different plans for this raid. With a single swing of his axe, he destroyed several beetles at once. He watched as the others also eliminated large beetles as if they were ants and realized that their teamwork was at the highest level. The protagonist understood that this group knew exactly what they were doing. He felt redundant in that battle and realized he didn't need to exert himself too much, as he might end up being a hindrance. Jack was destroying monsters one by one until suddenly he stopped and looked seriously at his ally with the sword. With just one look from Jack, the ally understood that he needed to let one of the monsters pass to the protagonist. Without hesitation, he allowed the first enemy that attacked him to pass by, pretending that he didn't have time to kill it. The spider-like creature advanced toward the protagonist with the intent to destroy the crystal. However, the young man didn't hesitate. With a smile on his face, he heard the others asking him to protect the crystal, as they had let a monster slip by. It took only a few seconds for him to defeat the enemy. At that moment, he thought that, although they worked well together, his strength was equivalent to that of an average player, and that they were nowhere near the level of the Strike's copy he had defeated. Soon after, a notification appeared in front of him informing that they had protected the crystal from the first of 3 waves, and that the next wave would arrive in 10 minutes. After exterminating all monsters, they sat down to rest. One of them commented that the protagonist was truly skilled, as at first glance, no one would say he was a master. With beginner gear, few would manage to defeat a monster 10 levels higher than them. The man with the sword, who had let the monster pass, blamed himself for his mistake. If the 10th member of the group hadn't suddenly disappeared, there would have been no flaws in the defense. The bald man reassured him, telling him not to worry, as the problem had already been resolved. He then turned to the protagonist and warned him that in the next wave, he would have to fight alongside them in defense, ensuring no monster passed. The man sitting next to Liu Yi suggested that they could invite the protagonist to join their team, so that he could be noticed. Then, he asked the protagonist what he thought about the idea of joining the group, as it would save him from having to look for people to form his own. Furthermore, by playing together, it could tackle high-level challenges. The protagonist really liked the proposal and even considered accepting it immediately. Soon after his agreement, the man in black armor asked Jack what he thought about Liu Yi joining them. Jack smiled and replied that he didn't oppose his entry into the group, but there were a few conditions. New members needed to provide their phone number and real address, as it would protect them from situations like the one they had faced earlier. Hearing this, the protagonist was confused. He didn't respond, just kept listening. Jack began talking about how difficult it had been to acquire those equipments, and in the end, Sam had taken everything for himself. Because of this, they now had problems with monsters. If Liu Yi wanted to join them, he would have to accept these conditions. The protagonist thought about it and understood the situation perfectly, even though no one had explained it to him clearly. After these words, Jack and his allies displayed malicious smiles that were hard to ignore. This made Liu Yi even more suspicious. They said their goal was to invite him to the raid, and for a few seconds, everyone was paralyzed, not knowing what to do. Quickly, Liu Yi stood up and observed the large number of mid-level players in the hall, realizing that this clearly wasn't a coincidence. They had intentionally chosen him, and as soon as they entered the raid, they showed friendliness toward him. Then they deliberately let the monster pass to see what the protagonist's real power was. In the end, they invited him to join the team permanently. With a smile on his face, Liu Yi concluded that based on everything that had happened, they were trying to gather information about his real address. Looking at Jack, from whom intense anger radiated, the protagonist kept talking, suggesting that he was probably the one responsible for the mirror realm of the New Order Guild. Before joining them, he had overheard the conversation of the same two guys talking about the New Order Guild, which had the real address of a 20-year-old guy who could defeat Strikes. Since then, no one had seen that guy again. The young man, smiling, said that he was flattered that his efforts had been recognized, especially for defeating a level 30 Strikes. With that, the protagonist realized that Jack had gathered everyone there to find out his real address and then deal with him. Jack, trying to hide his true personality, claimed that the protagonist had probably mistaken him for someone else. With his weapon in hand, the protagonist stated that, in reality, he didn't want to join their team. He was just thinking about making some money and gaining experience with such a strong team in a raid. However, seeing their intentions, he realized he shouldn't pretend anymore. After all, they were enemies and enemies should be eliminated. Jack stood up, glaring at the protagonist with a terrifying look, while Jack's entire team surrounded him. Then he started talking, mocking the idea that Liu Yi thought he could defeat 9 players, all 10 levels above him. One of the group members attacked the protagonist from behind, shouting that he was a disgrace. At that moment, a notification appeared before Liu Yi, informing that he had spent 30 power points to increase his next attack by 1500 damage, leaving him with 414 power points and 450 cognition remaining. The very next instant, the sword-wielding attacker fell dead, being thrown several meters away. Everyone was stunned by what they saw. With a single blow, he had killed an opponent 10 levels stronger than him. Those surrounding him were shocked, as no one expected a man to defeat, in an instant, someone so much stronger than him. Something began happening to the body of the dead character. It started glowing in an intense blue hue, as if it were absorbing something and transforming into another substance. After the transformation, an unknown orb appeared before the protagonist called the Blue Military Pearl. Note, military pearls drop when a player is defeated. There is a possibility of receiving a random item from the equipment or inventory of the defeated player. The protagonist picked up the orb and with a serious expression asked, "What's impossible about defeating 9 players?" Jack, furious, was ready to tear him apart, believing that the young man was overly confident. Soon Jack gave the order for everyone to attack the protagonist at once, and they all charged, trying to defeat him as quickly as possible. Unfortunately for them, the young man no longer knew mercy. A few seconds later, the first girl was F, just like the man with the hole in his head. The protagonist killed them one by one. He knew that by killing those enemies, he was taking away their chances of survival. Unfortunately, he had no other choice. He couldn't die there. His sister wouldn't be able to obtain the identities of the players, so regardless of what anyone said, he needed to become stronger. With his current strength, he wouldn't be able to protect his sister when the Yuan world took over their world. The protagonist decided he needed to climb to the top, but first he had to eliminate those who could stop him in the future. So to achieve his goal, Liu Yi decided to cross the mountain of corpses piling up around him. Jack and his entire squad stood paralyzed, wondering why they couldn't kill him even though their levels were much higher than the protagonist's and their equipment was better. The young man was extremely irritated, although he had already assumed the protagonist was this strong because he had defeated a level 30 Strikes clone. All of Jack's allies tried to persuade the protagonist to stop, believing that if he killed a few more of them, they wouldn't be able to clear the dungeons and would lose all their resources. The protagonist replied that it didn't matter to him since he could simply go to the secret mirror zone and do the same. What he lost he could recover in a single day, but with them, it was different. Their equipment would be lost, and they wouldn't have the strength or skills to defeat the mirror realm characters. Jack became even more irritated and said he could gather people to prevent the protagonist from entering the secret mirror zone, but Liu Yi just laughed in response. Then he began killing Jack's allies, something Jack himself couldn't believe. Jack wanted to order them to prevent more deaths, but before he could speak, 2 players behind him were already dead. As his allies were being defeated, Jack remembered a moment when he had greeted an important person who told him they should remain the top players in Yuan World. If they could keep that position, it didn't matter what they did to achieve it, as he would support them. However, looking at them, he added that if they failed, he wouldn't just stop supporting them, but would also reveal all their crimes, ensuring they were punished immediately. When Jack snapped back to reality, he realized everyone around him was dead, leaving only himself. Liu Yi prepared to finish Jack off, but Jack kneeled and began begging for mercy, pleading with the protagonist not to kill him. The young man didn't respond, only stared at him seriously, which only made Jack even angrier. He felt so pathetic that it disgusted him. Jack said that if he were spared, he would reveal the secret about Yuan World. Liu Yi smiled and told him to speak immediately, without beating around the bush. Jack asked the protagonist to promise to kill him right after, but instead, he was thrown several meters back. Liu Yi said that since he didn't want to talk, maybe it was better for him to go to the next world, as he didn't really want to know the secret yet. Jack landed a few meters away from Liu Yi, but didn't disappear or turn into pearls after the impact. He managed to survive the blow and tried to get up, trembling, which surprised the protagonist. Liu Yi was impressed by Jack's resilience, wondering how he had survived a direct attack. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from deep in the desert and immediately deduced that a second wave was about to begin. To start, Jack said Liu Yi must know some of Yuan World's secrets, as without them he couldn't have become so strong. What surprised Jack the most was that even he couldn't handle Liu Yi. Because of that, he planned to report everything to his superiors, and after that, Liu Yi would have to deal with not just him but likely would soon die and return to level 1. Getting back on his feet, Jack continued, saying that the protagonist really thought he could resist people stronger than him, like Jack. That was impossible, as very few people could level up this way, and when the secret Liu Yi seemed to know became useless, Jack was sure he would no longer have any advantage. The man began begging again for the protagonist to let him go. In exchange, he would reveal his secret, and together they could use Liu Yi's incredible strength to clear the remaining dungeon. Liu Yi smiled and asked why he thought the guy would die and not be able to clear the dungeon alone. Jack couldn't believe the protagonist's words, since he was only level 28 and no matter how strong he was, everyone had their limits, or so Jack believed. But suddenly the protagonist asked, what if I had level 56 equipment? Wouldn't it be easy for me to clear a level 35 dungeon? Jack couldn't believe Liu Yi's words. The protagonist held 2 pearls in his hands and asked if this was by any chance the equipment he wasn't supposed to have. Looking closer, Jack saw the blue orb in the man's hands. He couldn't believe what he was seeing, the surprise on his face unmistakable. With a confident and determined smile, the protagonist shouted for the blue orb to open and release his equipment. In an instant, the protagonist appeared dressed in yellow and black armor. He wore a chilled tank top that gave him incredible buffs, and it was also a purple rank. A fast combat suit of purple rank protected his entire body, offering resistance, strength, agility, and armor requiring level 30. The combat gloves provided the same attributes, with more focus on sensation, but strength was removed. High-speed violet rank combat boots granted the protagonist impressive agility. Most importantly, there was the beam-like katana, a purple rank, which gave Liu Yi a bonus of 160 attack power and also increased his defense by 30. Now the hero had incredible stats, and after calculating his combat power, he had level 46 abilities. With a smile on his face, he commented that he should thank the men who had just died by his hands as he had gained free equipment. Now with this gear, his combat abilities had increased more than threefold, showing that his opponents have truly failed to seize good opportunities to defeat him. Jack's face was completely shocked. He couldn't believe that Liu Yi had nearly tripled his attributes. Moments later, he realized everything was starting to irritate him. His surprise turned into anger and hatred. He began shouting that, no matter how much stronger the hero had become, he wouldn't be able to clear the dungeon alone. That was simply impossible. Around them, sounds of monsters approached at incredible speed. Then one of the monsters leaped onto the crystal. The heroes killed anyone who got close without even blinking. After killing one ant, several others appeared. Hundreds of ants attacked from behind, trying to kill him and cancel his level. Liu Yi wasn't going to give up so easily. One by one, he killed the ants, not giving them a chance to win. Liu Yi knew that if he didn't win, he wouldn't be able to protect his sister. Thanks to the pearl's effect, he didn't need to use his intellect to eliminate the insects attacking him from all sides. He was ready to bravely defend the crystal, even though enemies came from every direction. His life was at risk, and he needed to ensure victory. He defeated ant after ant. The number of corpses only grew, but it seemed endless. When Liu Yi's health dropped almost to 0, he used a healing spell, allowing him to continue the battle without losing strength. Meanwhile, Jack managed to kill some ants. He noticed the protagonist's health was low, but to his surprise, Liu Yi quickly healed himself. Jack couldn't believe his eyes. He thought Liu Yi was using rare potions and shouted that it didn't matter. Jack believed that if he just dodged, he could outlast Liu Yi. Liu Yi didn't pay any attention to Jack, focusing on killing the creatures surrounding him. Jack kept shouting that Liu Yi would pay for his arrogance, but Liu Yi smiled and replied that Jack should worry about his own survival. He could easily destroy the monsters and somehow handle the situation, so Liu Yi commented that even if Jack begged for mercy, it wouldn't save him. These words infuriated Jack even more. He couldn't believe that even in such a desperate situation, Liu Yi was so confident and bold in making such statements. Jack, staying alert, noticed an ant trying to attack him from the side, so he instantly killed it. Meanwhile, Liu Yi continued eliminating an impressive number of monsters. His health was reduced to a minimum again, but he used his healing ability once more, continuing his relentless fight. Hours passed as he slaughtered ants with no shame in his eyes, only a field of corpses around him, but the creatures didn't stop attacking the crystal. Jack, off to the side, watched the massive number of dead monsters and couldn't believe what he was seeing. He thought it was impossible for Liu Yi to have so many healing potions, since the amount he had used far exceeded what any player could carry for such a challenge. While Jack was staring at the pile of bodies, he didn't notice when a monster suddenly appeared, grabbing his hand and causing massive damage. His health dropped to the minimum again. He wanted to quickly use a healing potion, but when he opened his inventory, he saw it was empty. This confused him, and he realized this was the end. His health was at its lowest and enemies surrounded him from all sides. He no longer had the strength to keep fighting. The monster began tearing him apart, attacking him relentlessly, injuring every possible part of his body. Even in such a desperate situation, Jack still refused to accept the fact that he would die first and wouldn't get to see Liu Yi die before him. But as he looked at the hero, he realized that Liu Yi was was still handling all the enemies, killing them without much trouble. He decided that Liu Yi would pay for his insolence as soon as he died in the lobby. The young man continued watching everything with a smile on his face because he wasn't even slightly tired and still had plenty of strength. He actually enjoyed facing all the monsters attacking him. After all, that was how he gained experience and combat skills. At that moment, Jack was sent to the lobby with his level cancelled. A notification appeared on the protagonist's screen, indicating that only one person remained on his team, himself. By fulfilling all the conditions, the dungeon completion reward would be increased tenfold. After several hours of fighting the insects, the hero crouched on the ground, exhausted and trying to catch his breath. An impressive number of defeated ants surrounded him, all eliminated by him, and finally the wave of attacks ceased. The insects stopped attacking him, and looking at the mountain of bodies, he felt relieved, knowing that before the second wave, the ants would disappear. If that didn't happen, he wouldn't know where the crystal was and wouldn't be able to protect it. Not far from him, he saw the inscription, Golden Orb. The Golden Orb allowed the player to receive 3 random items from the inventory of a dead player. As soon as he saw the orb, Liu Yi quickly stood up with a smile on his face. He couldn't believe he had actually found the Golden Orb, just as he had hoped from the mirror copy manager. Finally, he had done something right. Approaching the Golden Orb, the protagonist picked it up and thought for a moment, knowing he didn't have much cognitive strength left. He would have about 10 minutes to rest, which would restore half of his strength. Naturally, that wouldn't be enough for him since he was in the third and final wave. Now he realized that he shouldn't have attacked the Zukovs so early. He should have waited for the last wave. All he could do now was hope the Golden Orb would bring something valuable to help him face the final wave. Upon speaking the words to open the Golden Orb, a notification appeared before him, offering a choice between equipment and items. Liu Yi began to think logically, considering that his strength, agility, and armor would soon reach 100 points. He wondered if he could get equipment that would enhance these 3 attributes and increase his combat skills. So he selected the equipment option. Immediately, a notification appeared stating that the system was opening the orb and the equipment would be extracted. He received a set of purple and gray amber equipment, which granted him 10 agility and 5 perception. The exact same second ring fell into the protagonist's right hand. The third item he obtained was a purple class pendulum pistol, which gave him 200 strength, 30 wisdom, and the skill to lock, in addition to tripling the damage of each attack or stunning the target. The pistol also had an automatic reload feature, but took 1 minute to fully recharge. Liu Yi was in shock, unable to believe what he was seeing. To him, it was simply incredible, and he believed it was his lucky day since he not only received buffs for all his equipment, but also enhanced his main weapon. Accessing his stats, the protagonist noticed that 4 of his attributes had surpassed 100 points, which made him very happy. That meant his combat skills were stronger than ever. After thinking for a bit, Liu Yi realized that if it weren't for those who had attacked him, he wouldn't have become this strong, so he decided to thank them. The protagonist thanked them with a smile on his face. He was ready to enter battle, knowing he was only behind in terms of level. But as soon as he protected the crystal from that dungeon, he would reach the top players. Now we are transported to the city at night, where we find ourselves in a room where players are revived after death. Jack stood in the middle of the room, talking to his boss, lowering his head and saying that Liu Yi definitely had some kind of secret that allowed him to have attributes exceeding his level. After everything that had happened, Jack claimed that if this weren't true, he wouldn't have died at the protagonist's hands. He told his boss that even if he didn't believe him, he should understand the complexity of the Ruined Kingdom dungeon. A level 28 player clearing a level 35 dungeon alone was too much, and there was definitely something wrong. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been able to kill everyone. The boss, looking at Jack with disdain, said he was giving him one more chance. In a few days, he needed to level up, and the boss would personally deal with Liu Yi, sending others to handle him. Jack thanked the leader for giving him another chance and said he would try. Now we return to reality to an unknown cafe where Yan was yelling at Nayan because her entire family was playing the game. The girl said that not only were they playing, but they were also making a lot of money, which surprised Yun. Nayan had trouble understanding why, but her parents forced her to level up with them every day. She was already tired and didn't want to do it anymore. Although her parents wanted Nayan to keep playing, she wanted to do it her own way. Suddenly, the girl stood up and asked Yun why she and her brother didn't play with her at her house in that calculation game, saying it would be fun to play with her brother. Yun was very surprised by the suggestion. She didn't have a device to play, but she suddenly realized this was her chance to bring Nayan and her brother together. If they played together, it would be a success, and all she had to do was leave the house under some pretext and let them be alone. This was her incredibly cunning plan, so she suggested they go to her house. Now return to the protagonist who had begun to face the third wave advancing toward him. He was defeating his opponents one after another. Liu Yi had never felt such strength as he did at that moment. When he put on the equipment, he felt every cell in his body develop. Especially under pressure, it felt as if the blade in his hands became even lighter. His steps became faster and more agile, and the height of his jumps allowed him to rise above all the creatures around him. In those moments, he felt incredibly majestic among the crowd. Liu Yi noticed something that caught his attention, a creature that even confused him a little, but he didn't take his eyes off it for a second. He decided to launch his strongest attack, leaping down and killing an entire horde of ants with a single strike. But that wasn't enough for him. He wanted more strength, more experience, more skills. And more importantly, by destroying the ants, he wanted to reach places he had only been able to gaze at before. Then the same creature he had noticed earlier appeared before him while he was above all the monsters. It was a level 35 spider boss. Without hesitation, the protagonist decided to finish it off once and for all. Suddenly, notifications began to appear in front of Liu Yi. The character received congratulations specifically for having cleared the dungeon, along with rewards. He gained an impressive amount of experience minus 360,000, which was multiplied by 10. Additionally, the character received the title of Dungeon Defender. For each ally lost in the dungeon, the player's stats increased by 10%. Now his stats had become incredibly high. Upon reaching level 36, he had amassed an immense amount of experience, and his attributes, damage, defense, stamina, strength, agility, endurance, intelligence, perception, points for distribution, health, and cognitive power, were astonishing. At level 30, he had been able to choose a development path. One of the options was Silence, a precise ability that, when used, reset all abilities by 5 seconds. The cost was 50 cognitive power points, and with each level up, the ability added 1 more second. The second development option was called Captivity, which bound the enemy to their starting point for 10 seconds. After defeating the monster, the character sat down satisfied, unable to believe he had taken down such a powerful creature alone. Most importantly, he was thrilled by how much stronger he had become in just a few hours, something he himself found hard to believe. Now we shift to the real world, to the protagonist's house, moving from virtual reality to actual reality. Liu Yi stepped onto the balcony to get some fresh air, reflecting on his actions and feeling proud of his current achievements. He was only waiting for the opportunity to enter the game again to make his sister as strong as he was, so she could protect herself in the future. Suddenly, Liu Yi heard someone knocking on the door behind him. When he entered the room, he saw that his sister had returned home. The girl standing in the hallway was holding a device to enter the game. She said it had been very difficult to get the device, but she was lucky to have a wonderful friend, Nyan, who had helped her obtain it. However, the device had caused her to lose connection. The girl entered the room and someone followed her. For a few seconds, Liu Yi was in shock. He couldn't believe his sister had managed to get a device to enter Yuan World. But then, his expression changed. He became incredibly happy because now she could play with him. Yan, with a huge smile on her face, said that since Nyan had gotten the device for her, she should be properly thanked, which meant Nyan would have to live with them. Nyan, without hesitation, greeted Liu Yi, and he, in turn, couldn't believe it was really a device to enter Yuan World, which to him was amazing. However, at that moment, the girl felt ignored and was quite annoyed. Liu Yi grabbed the box and started asking how they had managed to get the device. To him, it wasn't particularly important. After all, what mattered most was that they now had the device. His sister frowned, unable to believe her brother wasn't even paying attention to the beautiful girl beside him and was instead focused on his toy, even knowing that the girl would now be living with them. At that moment, Nyan was very surprised that some device could make Liu Yi so happy. Now we go back one day in time to an unknown level 40 dungeon, an immense forest under a bright moon surrounding the area. Several people were sitting around a campfire discussing the fact that if they entered the level 40 dungeon, they would surpass the second team, increasing their profits. They also talked about an incredibly strong girl who, thanks to her, they had found a village. This girl was part of the New Order group. Her team ranked 3rd. Of all the teams, her name was YC. Suddenly, a man named Chao Yang approached her, telling her that she could request to join the first team after clearing the dungeon, which would accelerate her development. Confused, she didn't quite understand what he was talking about and completely ignored his approach. Next, one of the team members told the captains that if YXA left, they wouldn't be able to develop as quickly. They dismissed the man's concerns and began discussing how, if YXA left, the team would have no future. Besides, they had invested so much in her and couldn't just let her go, especially when they needed her the most. The captain took a deep breath and said they couldn't hold someone back because of their feelings. He believed that even if she reached the highest rank in the New Order, she wouldn't forget them. The captain decided to confirm this and with a smile on his face asked her directly. In response, he only saw YX's smile. The participant, holding his head in his hands, realized that he couldn't simply wish her good luck as she moved on to new heights. Another teammate agreed with the captain's words, saying he was absolutely right and that there was no reason to hold back YX's progress. They were simply too weak. Everyone began to say that if the girl struggled in the first team, they wouldn't be so willing to take her back. It was just like before where she had first joined the team. They had helped her with everything she needed. Everyone was incredibly kind to the girl, and in response she smiled, thanked them, called them her brothers, and said they had been very kind to her. Since they had been so kind, she wanted to ask for one last favor. After saying all that, she felt very embarrassed. Everyone around her was in shock, not understanding what she meant. A deadly silence followed. A few seconds later, a blinding light appeared. All the team members collapsed, lifeless. Those who were still alive used healing abilities but couldn't believe what they were seeing. Wei Xi, who had been with them all this time, had betrayed them. She wanted to become incredibly strong, but her level wasn't high enough, so she decided to activate the dungeon's reward. This way, she would become the strongest player in Yuan World. The captain was furious with her. After everything they had done for her, was this how she repay their kindness? Wei Xi laughed again and waved her hand, saying there was no need to be so angry. It was just a game, and they could revive and level up again at any time. The captain didn't want to hear another word and told her to go to hell. She was an ungrateful creature, and he attacked her. Wei Xi easily dodged the bullets and reminded him that she had warned them many times. No matter how much they shot at her in Yuan World, bullet speed was limited. Therefore, bullets couldn't catch up to a player with over 100 agility points. Then she swiftly moved behind the captain and pierced his neck. Wei Xi coldly repeated that cold steel was an entirely different matter. It depended on the user's attributes. Speed and damage weren't limited, so she could kill the captain effortlessly. The next day, we are transported to a level 45 dungeon, where 20 people are fighting a humanoid monster. The captain reported that several people had run out of healing items and asked if they had stocked up enough. The captain, known as Strikes from the New Order, was fighting with impressive strength, while everyone around him admired his skills. He was exceptionally skilled, but his strength had a drawback. He needed to wait a long time to accumulate enough power. However, once he reached full strength, even the biggest monsters posed no challenge. The captain was level 45, and next to him was Blazing Fire from the New Order, also known as Blazing, who was also level 45. During the fight, the captain noticed another player with similar power and immediately questioned whether this player was an enemy or someone they could convince to join them. The master quickly responded that this player had killed the captain in charge of the Mirror Realm. This surprised Strikes so much that he scratched his head in disbelief. The captain then asked about a girl named Wei Xi and what she was up to. The scene then shifts to a forest outside the control zone. A girl stands at the edge of a cliff, looking at her system screen. She received a personal message from Blazing Fire, informing her that she needed to meet a new player, our protagonist, to give him his power. Wei Xi smiled with excitement as she read the message. It didn't mention anything about killing or recruiting the player, but she knew that powerful players were rare. If she could recruit the protagonist into the guild, it would mean she was doing everything for the guild's benefit. However, if she killed him, it would go against the guild's development. The master, seeing this, didn't care about the future of our protagonist and left the decision entirely up to her. The girl, valuing her worth, knew she had to prove her competence by either recruiting or eliminating the protagonist. After some reflection, she decided she would kill him.